Good afternoon, everyone. It is David Schlotthauer here with another detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion for Thursday, July 24th, 2025. In this tropical weather update, we are keeping an eye on an area of disturbed weather off the Gulf Coast in the United States. This has a 10% chance, so a low chance of formation in the next 7 days, whereas we are keeping an eye on a region over the next several days, perhaps from August 1st through the 10th, over the main development region for also additional tropical development down the road. So in this update, we will be breaking down all those details. Now, if you haven't been here before and you do find these detailed tropical weather outlook and discussions very helpful, detailed, and informative, please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell notification icon, hit that like button, so give that like a huge nudge, and also leave a comment in the section below this video as it does help out the channel very well. Now, with that being said, here's a look at the latest GOES 19 True Color Visible Satellite Imagery provided by Dr. Levi Cowan at tropicaltidbits.com, and there is some tropical weather action out there this afternoon as of Thursday. The first area that we're watching closely is in the northern Gulf here with showers and thunderstorms that remain quite disorganized. So with that being said, here's a look at the GFS model. We're going to look at all of our reliable global computer models, look at the environment, look at our ensembles, and look at the chances of tropical development out there in the main development region, because this is pretty concerning to say the least. And of course, we're going to look at our sea surface temperatures. So here's a look at the forecast for this afternoon. And what we're looking at here is the 3-plot system. Of course, our shaded areas that I've circled in here are basically areas of spin at 5,000 feet above the surface. And then, of course, we have our high pressure center right here, right over the Azores Islands. We have another ridge over here. We have some weakening ridging over here towards the northeast of the Greater Antilles. And then this is where we are really watching closely for further tropical development within the next 10 days. So putting this into motion now over the course of the next 2 to 3 days, we have a tropical wave that we are watching. There is not much model support on this developing actually between the European and the GFS, although the GFS is being a little more aggressive with it, but nothing that what you're about to see towards the very early part of August, which we are pretty concerned about. Wait until you see the ensembles on that and the deterministic forecast from the Euro. Then putting this into motion over the next 5 days, this is going to bring in some weather problems, perhaps over Jamaica, perhaps the Dominican Republic, Hispaniola portion there of the Northern Caribbean, and then eventually into Cuba, while that disturbance tries to move all the way into the central Gulf, where it could find another area of favorable environment for where it can develop. Now, I'm going to combine the two disturbances there because this is the next disturbance that models are really being bullish about, especially the European deterministic, the AI model, along to go with the ensemble forecast as well. And when I mean bullish, I mean some models are already sniffing out hurricane chances on this tropical wave. So that is why we're going to be nosediving into those ensembles here in just a second. But regardless of tropical development, given that this is a very strong, large tropical wave here, we are looking at pretty big impacts to the Lesser and Greater Antilles, including for Puerto Rico and perhaps for Hispaniola, Dominican Republic, just within the first 10 days here. So within the 10-day mark through the 1st of August, we are going to keep an eye on that wave for additional impacts. And then that moves on through. All right, so then that does it on the GFS model. But what about the European model? The European is being quite aggressive here. Again, same plot system at 850 millibars above the surface, which is 5,000 feet. And then putting this into motion, we can see this is just loading. Look at what we have here. Nothing much going on with the Euro, but look at, there's that tropical wave, and look at how sharp this is. This is pretty sharp nonetheless, and that is why this is going to bring a lot of weather impacts over the Lesser and Greater Antilles, such as very heavy rainfall, and this one could pose a big threat for flooding, some very strong winds nearing tropical storm force, some rough surf, and some minor storm surge within the estuaries with any cove or inlet here in some of these islands. This is going to be moving through rather quickly. And then look what happens. It moves very close to the Bahamas, gets pretty, not super close to Florida, but you know, a lot of people living in the United States will be watching this one closely, I'm sure. And then look what happens. It moves out and then it tries to develop further into maybe a tropical depression or a storm, but that's very, very far out. We only know what might happen in the first 7 days. So this is like 10 days right here. This is the 3rd of August where the wave is, and that's approaching the southeastern Bahama Islands. Now, looking at our artificial intelligence model from the European, this is an AI model, which is really great to use. And look at what we have. So let's refresh this again so we get new data. When we put this into motion, you can see there is whatever wave we have here really well spread out. Not much concern with that, but look at the AI model also shows a similar footprint. Now, of course, this is not a very high-res model at all. This is actually more poorly resolution versus the European and GFS deterministic models. But this gives us a rough idea on the footprint of what we're looking at. And what we have here is that tropical wave that does approach the northeastern portion there of the Caribbean, as well as the Greater Antilles. Now, it doesn't look all that strong here because of the high-resolution problems, but nonetheless, there will be impacts, it does appear, because this is where the ridge here is, and this is a very classic setup where this system is going to be able to move and then turn and really get close to the coast, similar to Hurricane Lee just a couple of years ago when that got awfully close to the coast there, and it made a very close call over here in Maine. Now that we took a look at our vorticity plot forecast, it is a good idea that will this tropical wave in the MDR in about 10 days develop into something pretty big? Well, with that being said, here's a look at the total precipitable water normalized anomaly. So this gives us an idea, is the atmosphere more moist than it should be, or is it less moist? So similar colors here than just the deep layer moisture plot that we typically look at is brown colors indicate below average PWatt values or total precipitable water amounts. The green and blue colors here on the map indicate above average and at times well above average PWatt values or total precipitable water amounts. So we want to see a lot of green here, which means there's more moisture than there should be in the atmosphere for that given location. And when we put this into motion, of course, there's a patch of dry air. That's why our tropical wave is not going to do much, and it's not going to be very productive. That's the leading one, the one that is somewhat out there. It's very anemic looking, doesn't look like it's going to do much. But this one back in here, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, it's this one right here, this envelope of moisture. Now, while there is some drier air to the north on this system, it's going to get mixed out very nicely because the background flow here is actually out of the easterly direction, not out of the northeasterly direction that we see typically in July. So the background environment here is quite formidably favorable for tropical development, to say the least, with this wave in itself. Others behind it remain in question because, after all, this is going to be occurring with the passing of a convective coupled Kelvin wave. So putting this into motion here in about 6 or 7 days. So this is through the very end of July. And what we have here is a very robust tropical wave. Look at all of this green to the north and to the east of our system. And our system is right in the middle of all of this green, a little bit asymmetrical, but nonetheless, there's not much wind shear to deal with here with our wave. And that is why there is a lot of support from both the European ensemble and GEFS ensemble. And this continues to develop. Now, the European, of course, is not bullish because it's just beyond the 7 to 8 day period. But man, that is quite a bit of moisture. That is a lot to deal with here. And that is why this wave has more potential for developing into something a little bit more significant than a tropical depression. Maybe seeing a tropical storm out of this, we will see. And then there is more drier air behind that, but far enough behind this wave that I'm not too concerned about it. And then beyond that, we will have to wait to see more tropical development, but it will have to probably wait until the middle to the end of August. Now, another factor in all of this will be the decreasing vertical deep layer wind shear in the Atlantic. All this red that you see here, all this orange indicates very strong deep layer vertical wind shear, anywhere between 30 to 50 knots, which is extremely unfavorable for tropical development. But our wave coming off of Africa, it's going to be moving into an environment here where there's very little vertical wind shear. And you can see anticyclonic vectors here. And a lot of people say, but there's a lot of wind shear to the north and to the southeast of it. Well, but look at what the shear is doing. So what we're looking for here is anticyclonic flow of shear vectors, which means there's a lot of outflow potential with this system. And we're not seeing shear cutting across something like this, where it's going to tear the system apart. And besides, this trough right here is retrograding. It's going to be backing away into the northern Caribbean just beyond the 7-day forecast. So what you end up seeing is a very conducive background environment here where this wave here is able to thrive quite well. And you can see this shaping up. See that trough there? It's backing away. And so we end up seeing outflow. Now, there is potential here. There might be a hair of southerly shear, as you can see here. Our wave pockets just on the eastern side of that fetch of strong vertical wind shear. But any shear there is hard to predict this far out. So I would use this with a grain of salt, because this trough is retrograding quite quickly while our system is approaching the Bahamas at this given time. And so depending on the convective structure, do we see a lot of convection that is able to whisk away all that deep layer vertical wind shear is something, but doesn't look too bad. I'll say that for sure. Up until the islands, at least, we're looking at vertical wind shear less than 10 knots in general, which is quite ideally favorable for this system. And then later on in the period, shear looks to pick up a little bit more, but that is very, 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 very far out. Now, looking at upper level tropospheric winds at 200 millibars, this is where commercial airliners fly. They fly typically at about 34 to 38,000 feet, and this is a plot looking at about 38 to 39,000 feet above the surface. So this is pretty dang high up. And what we have here is, of course, easterly flow in the very upper parts of the atmosphere, a little bit of westerly flow here, which is why our wave is not going to do so well. The leading one, which is right somewhere in here, it's going to be moving generally like this, and it's going to run into that belt of westerly flow. But my point here is, once we get further out in time, there is our tropical wave right here on the leading edge of this belt of easterly flow underneath it, with outflow accelerating northward. This is a pretty thermodynamic, conducive environment where this wave can actually kind of breathe out some of that air from lower parts of the atmosphere. And the ending result here is that this could find itself in a very conducive environment. Now, of course, this might seem like a lot of upper level winds, and you might think, oh, there's a lot of vertical wind shear here. But as long as our system is moving generally this direction along to go with the upper level flow that's coming roughly out of the same direction, there is not a whole lot of vertical wind shear here, generally less than 10 knots or so. So that's something to consider here, that, oh, there's a lot of winds down in the south of this wave, David. It's not going to develop. It might prevent it to some extent, but not entirely. It's not going to be like, oh, it's going to tear it apart completely. Because later on in the period, this thing does end up underneath a anticyclonic outflow Rossby wave breakoff. What you see here, there's your high, and then there is your trough axis that is moving across the central Caribbean in the upper parts. And so this could allow for pretty good tropical development as it rounds the apex of the subtropical ridge right here. So with that in mind, the European ensemble forecasting system has been quite bullish over the last couple of days at showing that this wave has serious potential of developing into either a tropical depression or storm, perhaps even a hurricane on some of these models. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself on that, because of course, now that I just said hurricane, people are going to freak out a little bit. I just want to let you know that there is a ceiling for this. It is very hard to say, but at the very worst case scenario right now, I would say an echelon of 70 miles an hour, which would be a high-end tropical storm if these trends do continue. because as you know, the system forms right here, and you can see a lot of these ensembles all in here indicating green colors, dark blue. In fact, some are showing yellow, orange, and over here they're showing red colors, which indicate that that is in the books of 70 knots or hurricane intensity. So there is definitely a big cluster here, or at least say maybe 60 or 70% of the members here showing at least a tropical storm or greater, versus our disturbance here off the Gulf in the southern United States. Not much signal on that at all. If that wasn't enough, the GEFS ensemble, even so it backed off a teeny wee bit, there is still model consensus here showing that this could become a tropical storm definitely in the next 10 days as it moves across the greater Antilles. That would be for Puerto Rico, the U.S. British Virgin Islands, Antigua and Guia as well. So keep that in mind up here. Definitely going to be updating you on this in days to come. And then we'll see where it goes from there, because there's a lot of uncertainty out to 10 days. And that's why this is limited to 10 days here on the weathernerds.org website. But there is definitely a signal between these two ensemble models. Again, you can see that clearly. Definitely a trend that we do not like to see this far out in time. So that pretty much circles us into the chances of something developing out here. This is a probabilistic forecast, and the European ensemble does a pretty good job at this. So this is a chance for tropical depression with winds greater or equivalent to 20 knots. And so the blue colors here indicate that there is a 30 to 40% chance of a tropical depression forming in the next 7 to 10 days in the greater Antilles, the lesser Antilles, including for Hispaniola, the Dominican Republic. Now, when we look at the chances of tropical storm-like conditions, that's winds greater than 34 knots or 39 miles per hour. And we can see here there is also a non-zero chance for tropical storm force winds. Those chances specifically are at 10 to 20% at this given time. So a very low chance that's to be expected out to about 8 to 10 days out. This is not very soon. This is in the medium range scope of things. And so we will be watching as this gets closer. Do these chances go up? Does the NHC eventually highlight something? For right now, they don't highlight anything out here in the MDR. And then the chances of hurricane conditions, and I hate to bring this up, but there is actually a non-zero chance, 64 knot winds or 74 miles per hour. And you can see right in here, this gray little opaque area over basically in very southeasternmost extreme of the Bahamas as well as Puerto Rico. There is a 5% chance that a hurricane could impact this area in a given time frame, and that is roughly in about 8 to 10 days. So with that being said, the National Hurricane Center only gives us a 10% chance of tropical development, as you can see here. So there is a very little to no chance of development. In fact, as matters of fact, based on the ensemble trends recently, I don't even see this developing at all. There's a 0% chance, in my own opinion, that this is actually going to consolidate as it moves towards Texas. But there is that non-zero chance that something surprising may happen. But out here in the MDR, while there is nothing highlighted from the NHC, that's to be expected since it is out of their scope of 7-day forecasting. We should see a highlighted area here soon in the next 2 to 4 days if those ensemble trends continue, especially over this general area is where I'm thinking a highlighted area will be released in the next 4 to 5 days perhaps. Another thing that I wanted to show you here is the sea surface temperature anomaly map as of 23rd of July. Of course, the Atlantic as a whole, we talked about this over and over again, how much of the Atlantic right now is running above average. Not as warm as it was last year, but it is still nonetheless warmer than it should be for this time of the year. The Gulf is running well above average. Along to go with the Caribbean has really made a big comeback over the last 2 to 3 weeks due to much weaker than normal trade winds. And out here in the MDR has really warmed up nicely. And where our tropical wave is going to develop, it is going to be moving across all of this warmer than normal sea surface temperature water. And then eventually as it turns and gets very close to the coast, perhaps, we don't know that for a fact, for sure, But if it does, it's going to be moving over some very, very warm, conducive waters just to the west of Bermuda and off the coast of the mid-Atlantic. Now, another thing that sticks out to me with this map is the continuation of the Atlantic Nina that has not really decomposed very much. It has failed to do so this time, which plays a wrinkle in our hurricane seasonal forecast. It leads to some stability problems, especially when you kind of divert some of the heat northward like this. So with above average sea surface temperatures, that means waters are warmer than normal, more latent heat release that warms up the atmosphere overall and leads to some stability problems. And so because of this, there is a mixed signal out there for August and September on exactly how busy will this hurricane season get, especially once we get into the peak hurricane season. But as on a positive or semi-positive note, as a whole, the Eastern Pacific is definitely below average, although this has really warmed up in recent weeks, which might play a little bit of a surprising role on exactly what ends up happening out here in the Atlantic. But it is still cool enough to support a near average hurricane season, especially a backloaded one for September, October, and even into early November, despite the fact that we have an Atlantic Nina, tongue twister there, and a somewhat warm neutral look here to INSO, especially in the El Nino 1+2 region. Now, speaking of busy period coming, when will it get really busy out there in the main development region of the Atlantic, or will it at all? So with that being said, here's a look at our velocity potential anomaly ensemble forecast guidance. And we look at this quite often to where you guys should understand what this means. So as we go down in time here, time increases. So this is August 26th. So if you make a line directly across, this is how the MJO will look like. And then this is what the MJO or velocity potential anomaly will look like in early September. So we can see clearly there's a weak convective coupled Kelvin wave passing over the Atlantic, which might kickstart our area of interest coming off of Africa. There's another area here, a much more favorable window for upward motion. Now, because convective coupled Kelvin waves as a whole act very different than an MJO, which is a large scale convective pattern feature across the tropics, these actually, you can get development right within where these pulses of rising motion occur and not offset. They're not usually delayed, unlike MJO events that are delayed by a lot. In other words, as this upward motion anomaly moves over the central Atlantic, we tend to get some activity out of these areas of rising motion. And then there's another weak signal showing up here in the objective VPA, I should say, by the ending the first week and beginning the second week of August before more sinking motion. But that's when we transition into more of a more coherent large wave signal or a high frequency signal wave pattern where we end up getting a lot of upward motion favored in MJO phases 1, 2, and 3, and that will help to kickstart the Atlantic. So despite all this sinking motion that we have here in the Atlantic, don't let that fool you. We are certainly going to have to watch to see if this actually comes to pass, which more than likely it will. We've seen this in recent weeks where models have been quite consistent on this, and if this actually ends up developing, most likely it is, we will probably see an uptick in tropical activity, especially after the 15th and the 20th of August. So down in here, we're going to see an uptick in tropical activity in the MDR. Whether or not will we see long-tracked tropical storms or hurricanes, that is very uncertain, and we cannot predict that very, very far out. And only we can use signals like this to kind of give us a paradigm of what the atmosphere could end up doing in months ahead. Now, with that all being said, if you did enjoy the tropical weather outlook and discussion, so if you found this very helpful, detailed, and informative, please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, folks. It really, really helps out a lot. Man, we are very close to 50,000 subscribers, and I cannot wait to hit 50K and share with you all how exciting my journey has been here on the YouTube channel, going on 3 years. Yeah, 3 years. So if you have not subscribed yet to the channel to get daily tropical weather outlook and discussions, also live coverage when a landfalling hurricane or tropical storm impacts near you, again, please don't forget to subscribe, share, and like, and also leave a comment in the section below this video. And as always, I'll be back with another detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion tomorrow.